This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans, and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 40 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/myangularstory. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of My Angular Story. This week we're talking to Jesse Liberty. Jesse, do you want to say hello?
Hello, and pleased to be here.
Now, we've had you on the Adventures in Angular podcast. I'm trying to remember exactly what we talked about. I usually look it up beforehand, but...
Well, at the time I was doing a fair amount of Angular work, as I remember.
Yeah, that's true. I know that you've moved on to some other things, and you're working on other things. In fact, do you want to just kind of give us a brief... Oh, there we go. Episode 15, you came and talked about Kendo UI and Angular. Do you want to just kind of give us an idea of what you're working on these days?
Sure. A lot of my attention has turned to working on mobile applications, but I recently took a job with Wintellect, and so I will be looking at Xamarin, certainly, and also Azure.
Mm-hmm.
And I expect over time to be doing more web programming, and then certainly with that doing some Angular.
Awesome. Well, this show kind of serves a few purposes. One is to show the people behind the code, but it's also an opportunity for us to catch up with people who have been on the show, just see where they are now. So we'll probably talk a little bit about your forays into Angular, and then we'll also talk about your forays into mobile development in Xamarin.
Sounds good.
All right, but let's go back. Let's go back a long time, and it's a long time with most people I talk to. How did you get into programming?
Into programming? Oh, well, let's see. In my high school, we had a Monrobot computer that was a paper tape, and I used to say that it was assembly. Turns out it was actually machine code, ones and zeros. So that gives you some idea when that was.
Oh, wow.
And didn't really like it that much. So stepped away from it. And then in college, didn't really like it that much, stepped away from it. And then when the IBM PC came out, I discovered that I really did like it. Personal computers really changed everything. So I learned, initially, I believe the first thing I learned was Turbo Pascal. And then I was at Citibank, and we had a contractor who helped me learn Unix programming. And I then called a friend who I had met who was a killer C programmer and told him I wanted to learn C. And he said, well, if you want to learn C, first learn assembly, which was great advice because when I got to C and pointers, they made perfect sense.
Yep.
So that was pretty much my entry point. Professional programming, getting paid for it, goes back about close to 30 years. And worked my way from C to C++ to C#, and then to the bazillion web tools and languages and so forth.
Right. That makes sense. So as you kind of came up through your career, I'm curious, how do you get to web development from doing C programming and ones and zeros?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the trick is to stay current. And, my experience is that there are programmers who prefer to get really good at something and then do that. And then there are other programmers like me who, as soon as we get proficient at something, it's time to move on and learn the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're bored easily. So at some point along there, I could tell you when. It was 19... Just bear with me for a second while I think about this. It was just before my younger daughter was born. So it's, I think it's 94. I was at a show. We were showing Ziff Davis's new offering, which was called Interchange. And we had hypertext and we had background tasks using Windows 3.1, which was quite remarkable, and a really nice user interface. And I was showing it off to the guy in the booth next to me, and he said, "That's very cool. Let me show you what we have. This thing's called Mosaic." And he explained the concept of the web. And I said, "Okay, we're dead." That was the end of that project. But at that point, I learned HTML. And from there, not long after, I learned JavaScript, pretty much when it first came out. And then CSS. And you know how it goes, working step by step.
Right. What was there something in particular about JavaScript that you liked, or was it just the fact that it executed on the web, and the web was kind of the thing that you were interested in?
No, JavaScript was and remains a nightmare. It's the only thing that has saved JavaScript, in my opinion, well, two things. One is the extensive libraries that have been built on top of it, like jQuery and so forth. But also now that TypeScript is a real language, that for me has really revitalized my interest in doing JavaScript work, because I can do it in TypeScript using strongly typed language with objects and then have that transpiled directly into JavaScript. Right.
And that's really interesting. I mean, TypeScript has made a lot of things a lot easier for me as well. And, it tends to be my preferred way of writing JavaScript. And I know everybody has their opinion, and some people are going to be like, not TypeScript. Of course, this is an Angular show, so maybe they will be all on board. I don't know. But yeah, we recently did a show, and I asked people why they were sticking with Angular 1, and a lot of people cited having to learn TypeScript as one of the reasons why they hadn't switched. So maybe not. Anyway, so yeah,
I gotta say that's easily overcome, that objection, because TypeScript, first of all, it's not an all or nothing decision. You can TypeScript is JavaScript, so you can incrementally learn it as you go. And secondly, strongly typed languages have tremendous advantages that don't get in the way of your programming, but do mean that you'll catch errors before runtime. So that's a strong selling point. I really don't get staying with Angular 1 because of the fear of TypeScript. To me, that seems like, let me see if I can come up with an analogy, sort of turning down your opportunity to be in a racing car because, you have a strong fear of pedals.
That makes me laugh. Yeah, so you get into JavaScript, and I'm assuming you went through the period where jQuery, and then we had some of the frameworks come out.
Yes.
At what point, or what was your path from web development into Angular?
Well, I think that the answer to that is John Papa was my path. And, as John got into Angular and developed real expertise, and some of the other folks who I really, really like in the industry, Ward Bell, and I'm leaving folks out, but as the cool kids started playing with Angular, it became very, very attractive. Right. And as I saw what it could do, it became even more attractive. So I was very impressed by Angular 1, much more impressed by Angular 2. Mm-hmm. It was almost silly to name it Angular 2. I mean, I see why they did, but it was so conspicuously different and better.
Yep.
I believe you guys are up to Angular 4 now. Or if I missed a week and a half and it's now Angular 5.
I think it's Angular 5.
Doesn't surprise me. The pace is very fast for Angular.
Yeah, I keep seeing, more updates and things like that. And I'm relatively certain that it's Angular 5. I mean, most of the stuff that I've been doing with Angular, Angular 5.2. I'm still playing with Angular 4, but yeah. Constantly updating, constantly putting new stuff out. So what did you wind up building or doing with Angular? Anything you're particularly proud of?
No. Nothing I'm particularly proud of. I really was in the position of learning and then ultimately teaching to some degree the fundamentals. But putting it to work in a real enterprise application, by the time I was in anything like a position to do that, I started doing mobile programming with Xamarin, and I've been doing that pretty steadily for a couple of years.
Right. So one other question that I have for you about Angular before we move on and talk about Xamarin and that journey is it seems like there's kind of been this argument over which framework makes the most sense to use for what. Did you get into any of that, or were you just in Angular until the next thing came along that made sense for you to move to?
I think it's more the latter. I try to avoid the religious wars over which platform is best. I know that a whole lot of folks who I respect are very impressed by React. My basic approach is that if you're working in Angular and it's doing the job for you, then the bar is high. It's not overwhelmingly high, but it's high to jump to the next hot thing. I think there has to be a good reason to do that. And if they're accomplishing essentially the same thing, then I'd rather develop some proficiency than just jump around.
Right. That makes sense. So you get in, you start doing stuff with Angular, and then you make the move to mobile and Xamarin. I'm curious both for the reasons and the process of making that change.
Well, I was working at the time for Falafel Software, which was a small consulting company. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I believe my title, which I can never remember, was Director of New Development, New Technology, some such thing. Mm-hmm. And they asked me to look at Xamarin Forms, and I really liked it a lot. And we built a couple applications in it. And shortly after that, I went independent and secured a couple of contracts in Xamarin Forms. The Xamarin Forms, when I first saw it, was being positioned as a prototyping language for quick and dirty programs. But I really felt like it had a whole lot more potential than that. In fact, I wrote a blog post called If I Were Miguel de Casa, and the thrust of that blog post was that I would put my investment, my money, my time into building out Xamarin Forms. And in fact, I think that's to a large degree what they did. You can see that because, if nothing else, the Xamarin University certification test has gone from having about 10% Xamarin Forms to about 70% Xamarin Forms. Mm-hmm. There is a growing consensus among Xamarin programmers that if you're going to take on a Xamarin application, your default choice should be Forms, and native should require a pretty good reason, because Forms gives you so much more reuse, and the risk is so much lower than it used to be, because if you decide that you've run into some sort of dead end and you wish you had done it in native, you can now embed Xamarin Form code directly into a native application, so nothing is lost.
So for those of us who are, strictly web and Angular and aren't familiar with the terms, what's the difference then between Xamarin Forms and Xamarin Native?
Sure. Xamarin Native says that you're going to work, for example, on an iOS application, and you're going to do that in C#, but the UI will be done in native iOS using the iOS toolkit. Mm-hmm. Similarly, if you're building an Android, you'll do it in C#, and then you'll build your UI as a standard Android application. And in fact, the C# can be shared between the iOS and the Android application. And remember, on both of those, what is produced at the end is native code. So the code that's produced by Xamarin iOS is physically indistinguishable from the code that's produced from Swift or Objective-C. Right. And similarly, the code that's produced by Xamarin Android is indistinguishable from code produced by Java. The idea of Xamarin Forms is to take that reuse that we get on the logic and extend that to the user interface.
Right.
And the way that that works in a nutshell is that you build Xamarin Forms using the Xamarin Forms controls, and then they are rendered as native controls on each platform.
Interesting. So, given your long history with the different web technologies, I guess the other question that I have is, why Xamarin? Because Xamarin's C# as opposed to something, one of the JavaScript related frameworks.
Right. Well, C# had and has a lot of advantages in terms of the maturity of the development environment, the maturity of the language, flexibility. I liked very much that you could write once and run on multiple platforms on iOS, Android, UWP. It seemed like a natural extension. Certainly, if you were a Silverlight programmer or a WPF programmer, you'd be very much at home in Xamarin. And the performance is native performance. You can't get better performance than you get out of Xamarin. So it made a lot of sense. Certainly made more sense a couple of years ago when the JavaScript programs that were running on the phone were essentially running in a browser and had terrible performance. These days, that's much less true. And when I'm asked by companies, should we use Xamarin or should we use a JavaScript-based development, my general answer is to ask, well, who are the programmers that you have and what are they already good at?
Right.
And if you have a stable of good C# programmers, then Xamarin is the obvious answer.
That makes sense. Which ecosystem do you want to maintain?
Exactly. And with Microsoft's acquisition of Xamarin, it looks so far very good that they are not diminishing Xamarin. They're not consuming or subsuming Xamarin. What they're doing is keeping its identity intact, but pouring R&D into it and extending it. And the fact that Miguel de Casa stayed as essentially the CTO of Xamarin within Microsoft, and the other founders are there and working hard on the platform, says that the acquisition by Microsoft is probably a very, very good thing.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting, you talk about this, and I know this is an Angular show, but a lot of the movement here is very interesting just from the standpoint of how code and how ecosystems evolve. It wasn't just that Microsoft acquired Xamarin. I believe I was actually at Build. It was Build 2016, I think, when they announced that they had acquired Xamarin. And I was at the event. But anyway, it's interesting because they not only acquired Xamarin, but they've also, reworked Xamarin Studio now to be Visual Studio for Mac. They've open sourced the .NET Core, which has a lot of ties into Mono, which was something that Xamarin grew out of. And so there are a lot of these tie-ins with the open source community that Microsoft seems to be not only acquiring, but adopting.
Yes, I don't think there's any question about that. There's been a radical turn at Microsoft towards support for open source. And John Galloway of Microsoft, great guy, good friend, is in charge of, I believe it's called the .NET Foundation, which is essentially a supporting organization for open source. Microsoft has open sourced a tremendous amount of their development environment and of their languages and underlying frameworks. So that, I think, has given a great deal more confidence in some sectors of the development community that Microsoft is serious about this commitment to .NET Core and to Xamarin and isn't going to pull the rug out from under them.
Right. So what are you working on now? Are there specific things that you're working on within the Xamarin ecosystem, or is it mostly just serving your clients?
Well, no, actually, I'm having a great deal of fun because I have a couple clients, both of which are Xamarin clients, one of which is has some very challenging graphics issues for Xamarin. And in the meantime, I'm working on my first Azure architecture test I don't generally go in for certification tests. Xamarin was the first time I actually did something like that. But Wintellect would like to have me certified on a number of Azure topics, so I'm doing that. And I'm also spending more time understanding the native Xamarin development specifically for some of the graphic issues. So have my finger in a number of different pies, and that's always good fun.
That's cool. I'm also curious, you kind of came up through, closer to the hardware programming with the, ones and zeros and the machine language, and then C, and then you kind of moved up, and then you were doing web, and now you're doing mobile. Do you see things kind of moving in a progression for your career? Do you see things moving more toward mobile or more toward web or more toward something else? And do you think something else is going to come up that's going to catch your interest here in another few years?
Well, there'll certainly be something else that catches my interest. Yes, I see a progression. I'm an application level programmer. So as such, the increasing abstraction over the years that allow me to ignore more of the plumbing and focus more on the application has been great. Mobile applications, mobile apps are certainly very strong in the industry right now, and I think getting stronger. More and more enterprise applications are being built, and that's very exciting. The tie-in between mobile as a front end and Azure as a back end gives tremendous potential. I suspect in the short run that my quote unquote new interest will be within Azure, because that is a big, large, hairy, scary framework. What will come in 2 or 3 years is anybody's guess.
Nice. Well, I mean, it's really interesting just to see this progression. And it's also interesting just to talk to people who took part in the Angular community. I know we met at one of the NG Confs.
Yes.
And then have moved on to other things. And just, I don't know exactly how to articulate it, but just, you don't have to be a one-trick pony, I guess. Go and do the things that kind of make you shine, make you happy.
Well, I have to admit to you that I miss working in Angular, and if I had total free choice of where to put my energy and had unlimited energy, then I would spend some of it on Angular. I think it is very, very cool. The issue has been the combination of where do my clients want me to go and how many hours are there in a day. So if I'm working in mobile and I'm building my skills in Azure, then adding Angular just at the moment doesn't really make sense. So it's sort of been I would say it's been on hold for a few months for a long time. That's what it comes down to.
Yep. Awesome. So I guess the last question is if people want to catch up with you or see what you're working on these days, maybe follow you on Twitter or GitHub, where are the best places to do that?
Oh, I'm easily reached. And it's always Jesse Liberty. So Twitter is @JesseLiberty, and my website is jesseliberty.com. And if you want to find out about what I'm doing, jesseliberty.me. So it's pretty easy to find me. These days, a really good place to reach me is at jliberty@wintellect.com. That is my principal occupation and certainly my employer and where I'm spending my time. So that's probably the best way to reach me, especially if you're interested in Wintellect potentially doing some consulting work for you. If you just want to chat, Twitter is probably the right thing.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll definitely encourage people if they decide that they need your brand of skills, with Xamarin and things like that, to reach out.
Well, I appreciate that.
All right. Well, the last section of the show is picks. Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. So are there some things you want to shout out about?
Sure. Visual Studio for Mac has made incredible progress in the short time since they switched over. When they first created Visual Studio for Mac, it was just Xamarin Studio in a new skin. But now it is rapidly becoming a major development environment, and since I slightly prefer to spend my time on the Mac, that's very exciting. Although I have to say that I do most of my Xamarin development on Windows. The other shout out, I guess, I've been spending a lot of time reading not only technical books, but a burst of fiction. And if you don't mind my plugging it, if folks are at any level interested, I don't know why they should be, in what my favorite books are, that's at amazon.com/shop/Jesse Liberty. So if for some reason you have an interest in which books I think are great this year, that's a good place to find it.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks as well. One of the features that they showed off at Microsoft Connect, which was in November, was the Visual Studio Live Share. And that's available for Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code when they release it. I'm not sure they've released it yet. But we did an interview on JavaScript Jabber with Amanda Silver and talked about TypeScript, and we also talked about the live sharing with Chris Dias and PJ Myers. So if you're interested in any of those features, you can check out those episodes, and then you can also just do a quick search for Visual Studio Live Share. Really, really cool features. And I understand that some of the other text editors have developed similar features, but it's nice to see that you can get some of these real-time remote collaboration things going on and do some of the stuff that's kind of hard sometimes to do across distances without somebody looking over your shoulder. So I'm going to pick that. And then also in the spirit of fiction, I've been reading a book series lately, or listening, I should say, on Audible, a book series that I've really been enjoying lately. It's one that I've listened to in the past. Listening to fiction just helps me relax in the evening, and that is The Wheel of Time. I'm currently on book 11, I think it is, Crossroads of Twilight. And anyway, the narrators are really terrific, and so I'm really enjoying that. And then I've also been listening to another book by Mark Sisson called The Keto Reset Diet. So if you're interested in keto or ketogenic, definitely check that out. And since I'm talking about keto and ketogenic, if you're interested in that particular way of eating, people call it the keto diet, but it's more of a lifestyle. Solves a lot of problems. I'm diabetic, so low carb to me makes sense. There's a terrific podcast out there called Two Keto Dudes, and if you're familiar with .NET Rocks, you can go check it out. Carl Franklin from .NET Rocks is one of the hosts. And then, incidentally, the other host is named Richard, but it's not Richard Campbell. And that also reminds me of one other thing that I probably ought to shout out about. I was recently on .NET Rocks. I've gotten to know Carl and Richard over the last several years, and they're awesome guys. But last week, as we record this, which is mid-January 2018, I did an episode with them. They released it on Thursday. And so if you're interested, I talked about finding a job, talked about some of the unconventional methods for getting noticed and moving up. So if you're interested in that, then definitely check that out as well. .NET Rocks is just a terrific podcast anyway, and they talk about all kinds of interesting things. So I'll shout that out too.
Well, congratulations on getting on .NET Rocks. That's certainly the big time, and I'll be looking for that show.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for coming, Jesse. It's always fun to catch up and find out what people are up to these days.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, we will wrap this one up, and we'll have another story next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.